It's important what he said about the cooperation as part of the supply chain, rapeseed supply chain, because without and generally rapeseed, kind of the whole production chain, because we need to have like a common goal, and common voice, and also I remember I was talking with Minister Ardanowski, and I remember he said that we are all lucky that we speak with one voice, and that we are basically the only sector that's integrated in such a way, because if we know what we want, we can speak with one voice, and then a lot easier. And so it's, we have this European Green New Deal, and definitely it will cause some difficulties, and it's not easy when it comes to obtaining the same yields and the same effects that we have today, because it limits the possibilities of plant protection. But we had different difficulties along the way. We've had debates previously, and we were thinking about, crossing the threshold in Poland of 3 million tons of rape processing, and this actually happened last year. So different problems that we had, we managed to kind of break those barriers. And as you can see by my gray hair, I've been a long time in this sector, and I remember many years ago this sector was processing about 1 million tons of rapeseed, and that has grown 3 times over the years. And we also have results from the first months of this year, and although last year was very good, and this year we managed to process even more than in the analogous period last year. So we're growing, and hopefully this will continue. Today's conference is very important, and we have international guests, because we are talking here about international kind of regulations, European international regulations, which are, something that's international, and it's where a local response is not enough. That's why we hope that we'll have some contacts that will be kind of, we can strike up new friendships, new contacts, and we can do things jointly, because we will not manage to, well, maybe we cannot put anything to vote and maybe vote on particular issues today, but this will give us a lot of ideas and a bigger scope for the whole Eurorzepak conference. Thank you, dear President. Of course, we're growing in numbers. 3 million tons is impressive. We already had a year when we, I think, crossed like when it comes to the farming area, we've crossed we've beat a record as well. But Mr. Szeliga will be with us today. Maybe we can hear about that a bit more. And now I would like to welcome in the we are in the Kujawsko-Pomorski Agricultural Consulting Center, in this very new center in Minikowo, a transfer knowledge center and innovation center. And Director Dr. Ryszard Zarudzki is with us. So the National Rapeseed Day is also a kind of an opening of the National Day of Rural Areas that you have inaugurated last year in Minikowo. So can you tell us something more about information regarding what in the context of rapeseed can we see here in Minikowo? Hello everyone. Hello from Minikowo, from the land of Kujawsko-Pomorski province. I would like to give my regards to all my internet viewers, and I would like to send my regards to all the speakers today. I hope that our undertaking, this international and local and national undertaking that we've decided to organize, I'm happy that we are here today in my center. We know what our mission is. and mainly it's us who want to be close to the farmers. We want to give you a lot of good advice. We want to initiate a debate, a discussion about one particular sector of rapeseed production. This is an association that's important. I mean, this is an event that's important, and it's happening at the same time as the National Day of Rural Areas. So I would like to encourage you in this virtual form. You can also visit us live when if you want to, and follow all the things that regard not only rapeseed but other things as well. I would like to encourage you to visit Minikovo. Hopefully many farmers from our area will also be interested in this area, in us, and hopefully we are hoping to be a strong voice in Europe along with other European friends when it comes to the discussion that's happening right now. What is the future? How to manage our fears? In what direction the production of rapeseed should go? Maybe you can learn more on the National Field Day. There will also be an event like that organized in the future. I would like to encourage you to kind of visit it as well. You can follow us if you need to know more. And let's hope that we'll all be satisfied from today's conference, because we are really working for you, and we want to know as much as possible. And with this in mind, I would like to wish you pleasant debates today, and let's hope we can learn as much as possible. So I understand in June we can come to Minikovo, right? Will it be possible to visit Minikovo in June? And not only connect via online sources, but also, yes, of course, I am encouraging you to visit our website. The 29th of May is like the threshold, and on the 5th of June we will know if we can meet here together personally. I would really like this unblocking to happen and we can meet personally. Let's hope that we can meet in Minikovo soon, and we are ready until we are certain that we will be allowed to meet today. So you mentioned in that basically when it comes to your center, it's basically open for everybody, not only from the official opening of the agricultural days. Yes, of course, we are here not only opened on the when the agricultural celebrations start. You can actually visit us whenever you want. Minikovo and our center in Minikovo is opened, and of course you can come and visit us if you want to, especially in spring. But if you can join us on the festival of an event of the National Agricultural Day, you can see many things, many different varieties of rapeseed and different things. I will definitely on the conference, on the events, like this, we have this huge agricultural festival that we'll have. There will be a lot of knowledge transfer. We will show innovation, and that's why we're building this infrastructure and infrastructure to serve farmers and to disseminate information. So I think that farmers from around the country will come here, right? Yes, I think that we already have the connection via the A1 highway. So all farmers from around Poland, you're welcome to visit us, and all of our friends from abroad, you're welcome to visit us here in Minikovo on the Agricultural Day. A huge event for us and for farmers around Poland. Yes, the weather is really good at this time of year, although it took a while for spring to arrive, but it's nice that the weather today is very conducive. And now let's invite Mr. Vice Director, Deputy Director of the Regional Agency of Restructuring and Modernization of Agriculture, who will read a letter of Secretary of State Anna Gębicka. Director, welcome. I will give the floor to you. Also, I would like to welcome Mr. Juliusz Modecki, because, from what I know, the letter is addressed to Mr. President Wodecki of the National Association of Rapeseed and protein plants producers. The Minister Anna Gębicka, Secretary of Governmental Agency. I would like to welcome you to the conference entitled Rapeseed Manufacturing and the European Green New Deal. Unfortunately, due to my parliamentary duties, I cannot participate personally. The topic touched upon you is also dealing with a very important area of agriculture and agri-food sector in the context of European strategies from farm to fork and also Biodiversity 2030. These strategies are setting out European goals in terms of environmental protection, preventing climate change and improvement of food quality. One of the main pillars of European Green New Deal is the zero-emission strategy. All policies of European Union will have to be adjusted in such a way as to contribute to the implementation of, for example, that particular goal. Doubtless, European Green New Deal will translate into competitiveness of Polish agriculture and also the development of entrepreneurship in rural areas. Therefore, in relation to EU strategies, the government of the Republic of Poland underlines that all legislative changes serving the implementation of strategic goals should also be preceded by a reliable analysis, including not only the environmental aspects, but also issues relating to food security of European Union and also competitiveness of EU agriculture. In this context, what's especially important is the development of cultivation of rapeseed oil and other protein plants. For many years, the cultivation of rapeseed in Poland, apart from the basic food aspect, is also important in terms of fuel production, contributing to the limiting of greenhouse gas emissions. I am convinced that the debate with experts as part of the International Rapeseed Day Eurorzepak 2021 will be fruitful and will help us exchange information and practical experiences in terms of improvement of production. This will also be important in terms of European Green New Deal, as well as the possibility to sell agricultural products. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very happy that you will meet in this distinguished milieu to discuss the challenges facing Polish agriculture. I would like to wish you fruitful exchange of information. Regards, Anna Gębicka. The Secretary of State from the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. I'm very happy that the representative of Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development will take part in today's debate. I'm very happy. Thank you. Thank you for reading the letter. And ladies and gentlemen, just as Mr. President said, Mr. Director Smoczynski will join us in our debate, so we'll have the voice of the ministry in our debate regarding the perspectives for the rapeseed cultivation in the conditions of Green New Deal. And now I would like to welcome the guest who you all know well and who you know in this region, especially where we are right now, because I'm talking about Jan Krzysztof Ardanowski, Minister Krzysztof Ardanowski, the MP of the Dąbrzyński land, representative of the Agricultural Council advising the government. I'm happy that you're with us. You've been with us 2 years ago as well on our Eurorzepak meeting in Minikowo, and today we are on stage, just like as if we were in a TV studio. I hope that you can all hear me correctly and that you can see me. Dear Minister, what are the perspectives for rapeseed in this entire discussion that's happening in the European Union when it comes to Green New Deal, the strategies from field to fork, which for rapeseed, that's a very intensive plant when it comes to kind of assuming the limiting the plant protection measures. Well, this whole debate is kind of, we are all fearful a little bit whether this whole plant will be the level of cultivation will be maintained, because whether this plant will still be interested for farmers to cultivate. Yes, well, first of all, I would like to thank you for organizing it in like this international dimension. I would like to send my regards to Poland, Polish guests and European guests. And yes, in fact, I would like, maybe let's concentrate on some details. First of all, European Green New Deal is like an ideology. When it comes to its general assumptions, we know what they are. We are not debating them. It's about all sectors of the economy to have a limit, less pressure, that they influence in the environment less, so as to make a human activity more sustainable, also in agriculture. But when we proceed from the general debate idea, and when we go into the particularities and the particular things, material things, then it turns out that there is still a lot of lack of clarity, and of course there are new fears when it comes to the future of agriculture. We are talking about rapeseed. This is not one of many plants cultivated in Europe. It's a plant that's very particular, that in the history of European agriculture has played in place one of the most important roles. I'm not sure if these assumptions of Green New Deal will not make this cultivation will not cause a decline or cause it to disappear. Let's hope it will not happen. But this is a intensive plant, but it's hard to imagine changes in agriculture related to ensuring protection of soil, increasing the organic substances in the soil, also crop rotation, without rapeseed. On some types of soils, rapeseed has to be cultivated. If it's not, then it causes a lot of, it's kind of damaging too in this whole agricultural sense. Not only oil, but we also manufacture other great resources which can be used by many industries. Of course, maybe the demand for biofuels will change because the world is going towards the hydrogen, hybrid powered systems, etc. But this still is an important element that we can use. I mean, rapeseed is still being used. It's an important element in the entire economy. And if the Europe wants to depart from being dependent on the kind of protein, and if we want to depart from protein, fodder protein being supplied by Americans, for example, and we want to develop more European fodder, we have to think about rapeseed as well. What will be this kind of rapeseed protein, and how do we interpret this kind of rapeseed protein? Do we want to increase the potential? If we want to improve the protein balance, we need to kind of increase, or maybe even talk about, we need to talk about the biodiversity that rapeseed ensures to, for example, animals, to insects. Yes, Europe. Basically, there's been a lot of kind of there's been a decline when it comes to protein production, because especially in France, because it seemed that American soy would be a global solution. It's no longer a global solution. It's like a monopolization on one hand, and it may turn out that there will be not enough soy, because different weather anomalies will cause also this kind of source of protein to be unreliable. So we need to rebuild this protein program, and rapeseed plays an important part. It's an improved rapeseed, imperfected rapeseed. It's a lot better than the rapeseed from 40 years ago. It's a great quality protein that can be subject of kind of enrichment by physical-chemical processes, and these are obvious things. And the protein supported by, rapeseed, also by other plants, rapeseed and other plants can actually, like broad bean kind of, rapeseed can kind of replace even genetically modified soy, I think, in these terms, I think. So the demand for rapeseed is growing, and I'm happy that recent years have been rather successful. I'm very happy that many people have appreciated also my role in protecting rapeseed in Poland. Yes, Poland was in the it was one of, maybe even one of the few countries that allowed the use of neonicotinoids, but this derogative period has finished. I think it could be continued, but this is a debate that's been taking place in many environments, in many different, by many different people in many different circles. We're debating how to protect. Even the beekeepers some of them are saying that they were safe for their bees, but that time has passed. So we need to look for something that can protect plants. So we need to think about how to we replace those substances that were, according to ecologists, toxic. So if somebody thinks that you can actually conduct agriculture, especially this kind of beautiful plant of rapeseed, who thinks that we can cultivate rapeseed without plant protection measures, then of course that is not right. We need to protect the plants. And we need to have like concrete decision when it comes to particular species of plants, maybe even kind of varieties of plants in some cases, and specifying how do we want to protect the soil, how do we do the biologization of soil, how do we improve the organic matter in soil, whether there are some programs to do it. And it seems that there are some programs to do it. But of course, without rapeseed, no European Green New Deal will be able to function. And some people naively think, who don't know agriculture, and some people think that the Green New Deal is an agriculture that will kind of function without plant protection measures. Rapeseed, definitely not. This super important plant, due to some ideological conditioning of Green New Deal, let's hope it will not decline. In the next few years, as part of the tri-dialogue, we'll have more shapes when we'll have this whole from farm to fork strategy and biodiversity strategy will have more shape. Mr. Hans Zimmermans says that that some of the plans, pro-environmental plans, are not ambitious enough. So do you think that in this this dialogue between three parties, would you expect some compromise in the spirit of kind of common sense, the agricultural common sense could win? Or do you think that this kind of pro-ecological approach will win, that will not be serving the cultivation of rapeseed? We are all ecologists. We all support pro-environmental actions. I don't know any common sense person who would question the direction of protection of environment, sustainable development, and decreasing the negative impact on the environment. But we have to depart from some stupid things and some ideologies. If somebody say we need to replace all meat with synthetic meat, or when you say that because cultivation of that we need to stop all cultivation and just we need to stop all cultivation on fields because it's all anthropogenic and we need to just leave the fields be. That means that such people don't understand the food security, basis of food security. It's hard to imagine the functioning of Europe, which also has to eat something. We need to produce fodder for our animals. And if we eliminate agriculture, how do we do that? So I see that many people who claim themselves ecologists, but I don't know if they are really ecologists. Some say that there is a conviction that agriculture is like a damaging activity. When we were talking, even in fairy tales, we used to say that it's a land of milk and honey. Now we say that milk is damaging and it comes from raping cows. And so really nonsensical things are being said in an axiological and ideological sense, and has to be explained from us agricultural people of agriculture, and we need to explain these things to society. And these meetings, like Eurorzepak, Euro Rapeseed, these debates also have to translate into convincing the society and consumers and explaining to all those who don't know nothing about agriculture. So some people just But consumers like the yellow rapeseed fields and they can appreciate the beauty. But the question is whether they can appreciate it in the context of discussions regarding all the limitations that can happen. Yes, we need to present that without good farming, without good, well-structured agriculture, and rapeseed needs to play an important part in it. I told you why. It's hard to imagine the future of human civilization, countries that have good conditions for the cultivation of agriculture. Like, Europe territory are kind of good when it comes to agriculture, have a duty to their citizens and towards the whole human population, the duty to manufacture food, including oils, plant oils, also for those people on those continents who are not able, because of weather conditions, to do enough farming. If we don't do that, we'll have huge migration, people migration. So we are responsible for our own consumers and also for feeding humanity, and agriculture needs to survive and develop. Green New Deal requires an analysis. It needs to be rationally considered and not ideology, it cannot be just an ideology like some people think. Rapeseed is very high on kind of this ladder of importance, because 50% of rapeseed goes for energy requirements. So today, from a point of view of policy, is there public consent for agriculture to kind of be involved in this way also in like renewable energy, so that it became a strong source of renewable energy? I think that social acceptance is there and will be there if we explain it to society well. If we want to if we want to depart from fossil fuels, we need to go into renewable energy, like wind, solar, and also cultivation of plants, because there is a synergy of two activities. On one hand side, we have ecological, par excellence, ecological resource that's devoted for as an additive for fuels. So we have biological fuel, but also we are sequestering coal, because good cultivation, well-structured rapeseed cultivation, or maybe even other plants, it's not just the final product, but it's also about consuming carbon and preventing climate change. Of course, let's develop low-emission economies, decrease carbon footprint, let's take care about not polluting the environment, but a rational response, and Poland has been mentioned this for many years. A rational response is to increase the absorption, so the plants, woods, forests and agriculture are the best answer for climate change. I cannot imagine, and these challenges I see, of course, the dangers of kind of approaching to agriculture in an ideological way, because if we just tell fairy tales and we are not based on new technologies and particular knowledge. And again, I would like to address the companies who build plant protection measures. Please invent chemicals that are pressuring the environment less, and maybe I will once again say that we cannot just approach agriculture through a perspective of ideology. We need particular concrete solutions from like all the companies involved in this sector. Like, technology is helping us. For example, we can, talk with our friends via online sources, via technology, but we also, through our online technology, we can reach consumers and society and tell the society how important agriculture is for our society and how important rapeseed oil is for agriculture. Hopefully that the modern tractors have Bluetooth connections and all the farmers can listen to us via their Bluetooth connections in their tractors. Let's hope that as many people can hear us as well. Let's hope that the work in the council that you work in would be a good kind of would give you motivation, especially when it comes to the national framework strategies are being formed. And I think they will also be important for farmers, rapeseed farmers. The president is a huge proponent of farmers, and I would like to send my regards on behalf of the president as well. I think that Mr. Ardanowski's remarks, who is always a man who is always a concrete person, always he's standing hard on the ground with both feet. So we would like to thank him for his words. And now Mr. Dr. Witold Szczepaniak will talk to us about rapeseed production and its quality and the challenges in the age of the European Green New Deal.
Pan profesor Witold Szczepaniak. Dzień dobry, panie profesorze.
Dzień dobry, panie redaktorze.
Bardzo miło pana profesora widzieć w Uniwersytecie w Poznaniu. Pan profesor dzisiaj nam powie o tym, jak utrzymać jakość i poziom produkcji wyzwań Europejskiego Zielonego Ładu. Ten Zielony Ład nam przyświeca jako dzień.
So we're talking about Green New Deal and different aspects of it, and especially in the context of rapeseed oil. So you will talk to us about a scientific point of view. Yes, of course. Yes, I would like to. Let's hope that what the minister said would come true, at least in part, and let's hope that the rapeseed could develop further in the future. But we also need to be aware that if this regulation are implemented and if the goals are implemented, then I would like to say, just as the minister, rapeseed cultivation requires protection, and we might have a problem with that. So the floor is yours, Professor. Just as has been presented earlier, how to keep the quality and production of rapeseed oil, especially in the context of Green New Deal. So I represent the chemical agriculture department at the University of Environmental Sciences in Poznań, and we will talk about life sciences and the University of Life Sciences in Poznań, and of course we'll talk about a little bit about rapeseed. We'll mention also plant protection measures, and of course rapeseed is a demanding plant, and in order to implement its potential, in order to fulfill its potential, and in order to get an appropriate quality of it, we need, both in the springtime and autumn, we need to appropriately provide good nutrition for these plants. So we'll focus on certain aspects in the context of Green New Deal that has been mentioned by my predecessors, by previous speakers. We'll also talk about the quality factors that will have influence on rapeseed. Another thing that we'll mention is the content of oil in the seeds. We need to be aware that there are quite big differences in different varieties. I will also like to tell you about experiments that I've done in some seed companies where I worked, and I will tell you about how nitrogen can shape the seeds and the plants themselves. But I also will tell you about environmental factors. It's not only the variety of the plant. And then the next point, I will tell you how the crop is formed and what is the physiology of physiology of yield. So in order to kind of refer to these assumptions of Green New Deal, we need to also understand the plant itself. What does the plant need? And only later should we implement particular legal regulations, so that we, if we don't take the plant into consideration, we will not implement implement those quality standards, and we will not be able to keep the production potential that we want. Next point, weather conditions and the development of plants. So it's obvious that the development of plants depends on the weather conditions, and I would like to refer to especially Polish conditions, because we have had, the oil in the seeds is sometimes, content of oil in seeds is below our expectations because of weather, especially agrotechnical conditions. And the last point, rational fertilization in the age of Green New Deal, how to maintain the production level of rapeseed. I would like to know the answer to this question, but we are only in the beginning of our road. The first assumptions will be mandatory until 2030, maybe even 2050, and we hear we are supposed to be climate neutral by 2050 as Europe, but as my former speakers have stressed, let's not forget that plants have their requirements, and that in order to fulfill these requirements, on one hand we need to feed the plant appropriately, provide nutrition and protect it. When we look at the European Green New Deal, well, the previous speaker has talked about it already, so it's not that it will regard only the agricultural sector, it will regard all aspects of life. And just as I have mentioned earlier, the assumption is that we're supposed to be climate neutral by 2050, and the shorter period of time is 2030. It's the first stage, and among other things, one of the pillars of the Green New Deal is the strategy from farm to fork strategy, and there are many different areas in the strategy. For example, balanced sustainable food production. When we talk about sustainable food production, well, we need to agree that the plant needs to be healthy, the plant needs to be have proper nutrition, so the regulations that will be implemented also need to take that into consideration. What else? Sustainable processing and distribution of food, sustainable consumption, and preventing food waste. It's obvious. But when we look at the first point, which is ensuring the sustainable food production and the goals until 2030, so in this 2030 perspective, we have 9 years. So in the first point, you see development of ecological farming, and the goals are very ambitious. It's scary, because 25% of the agricultural land needs to be for ecological farming. I am giving an open rhetorical question. Is it possible to have ecological rapeseed farms and rapeseed cultivation? So if the answer is not necessarily, then my question would be, so which land will be excluded for agricultural farms? What will be the subsidies for ecological farming so as to fulfill these conditions? From now, what I see, we have about 400,000-500,000 hectares of ecological farming, and very frequently these agricultural farms are only working because they have subsidies. But we'll pay attention to the fact that in the next 9 years it's supposed to be 5 or even 6 times bigger in order to fulfill these ambitious goals that have been assumed here. So personally, when I was thinking about it, I have to admit, I do not see it in this short perspective. I do not see how this could be done. What else? Decrease of chemical pesticides, and also dangers that these pesticides bring by 50%. What consequences can this have when it comes to the production of rapeseed? We might kind of reverse the question and say, depending on which pesticide will be withdrawn, but looking at recent years, our experience is that those pesticides are also withdrawn, which usually been applied very broadly in rapeseed production. And as we have mentioned, or my previous speakers mentioned, rapeseed needs to be healthy in order to produce healthy food, to be able to implement its yield forming potential and appropriate quality of seeds. And what's personally regarding me, decreasing of food waste by 50%. Of course, I am all for it. What else is related to it? it also says that the fertility of land needs to be kept. Yes, of course, if we decrease food waste, we will improve the fertility of land. But according to European Commission, as you can see here, it should lead to the limiting of application of fertilizers by 20%. I've been dealing with fertilization for 20 years, and I have to tell you that there are many aspects regarding fertilization. There are many things that need improvement, of course, when it comes to fertilization. Because if you look at land in Poland, on average, in some voivodeships, we have a lot of acidity in land, even above 50% of land is. So it's hard for me to imagine to limit the use of, for example, calcium-related or phosphorus-related or potassium-related or magnesium, sulfur-related fertilizers, etc., etc., because rapeseed needs these substances, and what is important, and I will show you as well, it needs needs a lot of them in order to implement this yield-forming potential in difficult weather conditions. So these are ambitious goals, but let's be honest, these goals will require a particular regulations in order not to throw the baby with the bathwater. And if we look at these factors that are deciding about the yield and quality of rapeseed, we might divide them into three groups. There are defining factors. For example, we can mention the variety, or some other factors like those limiting the yield. For example, if we look at Polish or European conditions, these are water and nitrogen, and factors responsible for high efficiency water and nitrogen efficiency. Why? Because water is life and nitrogen is this supraordinate food kind of substance that ensures proper growth. If we look at the third group of factors, is the yield reducing factors: weed, pathogens, pests, and polluted air and soil. Therefore, if we look at those European goals of European Green New Deal, we also need to have the awareness that it interferes both in those yield limiting and conditions, as well as yield supporting and yield limiting factors. So it influences both. So we need to think that if we want to implement our goals, let's hope that we will not pose more danger for the plant. So we will not be able to realize appropriate yield, and we will not be able to realize appropriate quality of the plant. So we need to make sure that we can do it, and that we will not, whether this strategy will not backfire, right? So, for example, I have been studying the potential of yield-forming potential, for example, in the post-registration variety testing. And in between 2016 and 2020, if we look at the standard, the number of oil in seeds has been decreasing. Why? Do we have worse plants? No, the plants are good, the varieties are good, but we have very changing weather conditions, and those changing weather conditions, if we want to maintain the same agrotechniques, we might not be efficient, and it might result in the fact that the content of oil in the seed will be lower, and sometimes even lower than 40%, which has been experienced painfully by farmers in Poland. And then we have appropriate deductions for quality, and also the other partners in the supply in the chain, in the production chain, are not satisfied if this oil quality in seeds is not sufficient. When it comes to other nutrients in the seeds that we have, for example, we might be the same. So coming back to the content of oil in the seeds, well, on average we had about 2-3% variation, but if we add such factors as, for example, the time period of sowing, and we tested, for example, 6 varieties, and there were 5 levels of nitrogen nitrogen application, and then this variety is kind of bigger. If you look at the averages, you can see that if we look at the content of fat, for example, then you can see that it was about plus minus 2%, and if you look at the influence of fertilization from, then we also see that the content is between plus minus 2%, and what's important, it's important that the higher level of nitrogen fertilization, the lower the content of fat, and this correlation normally is because of physiological conditioning of the plant, but we also need to be aware of the fact that the higher level of fertilization, the higher yield. Of course, up to a certain limit, you know, because when you have 240 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, this growth was very small, and if you double the nitrogen from 120 to 240 in the spring season, because we are talking about spring season, it actually caused the growth of yield by 300 kilograms, which doesn't mean that the dosage was optimal in this experiment on the level of 120, but it means that not necessarily it's always necessary to use 240 kilograms. Why? Because the growth of yield is very low at the bottom, at the top end, and at the same time we have decrease of fat in the seeds between 120 and 240, and nitrogen, the content has decreased by 0.64%. So of course we also have a correlation of the nitrogen is positively correlated with protein, but negatively correlated with the fat. And also what we need to focus on is the yield of fat. And with the bigger dosage of nitrogen, it wasn't as good as high, so as to be satisfactory. And we also need to look at it from the point of view of the fat yield, but also the costs that we need to bear in order to implement this fat yield. And if we look at the dependence of protein and fat, then you see that in this experiment, if we have 180 fields, experimental fields, then this kind of we weren't talking here about 2 or 5% on fluctuation, but here the fluctuation was about 8%. So we can see it's not about genetic factors in shaping the content of oil in seeds, but what's also important is this environmental factor. So what we do, in terms of soil fertility and maintaining soil fertility, or even improving soil fertility, because one of the goals of the European Green New Deal, the farm to fork strategy, wants to keep the fertility of the land. But in order to keep it, we need to have appropriate land. First, we need to make it good, and then we can talk about sustaining it in a good condition. If we look at the dependence of yield of oil, of fat, what's important is the seed yield. And here we have linear dependence, but when we talk about the yield of fat and the yield of seeds, then you can see on the slide also the correlation. And as I said, the biggest content we'll have on those plants that are still hungry for nitrogen, but in order to have proper supply of nutrients, we need to have rational nitrogen fertilization that will increase the yield, but also will help us obtain good quality product. When we look at other substances, in literature, we will also see documents about sulfur, for example. What about sulfur? So, will sulfur increase the fat in the seeds? Yes, but only if you don't use too much nitrogen. Why? Because sulfur is influencing positively the nitrogen processing of within the plant, but we also need other macro elements that rapeseed needs a lot, like sulfur. But we need to be sure that, for example, it might happen that the increase of sulfur, instead of increasing the oil, it might cause some lowering or decrease of oil, because it will kind of influence on the absorption and processing of nitrogen. So we shouldn't eliminate sulfur altogether, but we should be more careful about nitrogen, because nitrogen is actually influencing the quality of the plant, and of course then we should supply some sulfur. If you look at the dependency, we have okay, so you see we have this thesis that sulfur, you can see on the slide, sulfur and the relation of sulfur and nitrogen. What else? Well, potassium also is important in influencing the content of oil. This is an experiment that has been conducted in our facility by our department at the university. You can see several levels of fertilization of nitrogen and potassium, and you can see that this particle also is influencing the plant and increases the content of fat, content of oil, sorry, and this, we can see that here we were actually cultivating it on high potassium rich soils. Potassium is important for plants, and also on a fertile soil we can even approach more rationally to when it comes to nitrogen and provide it in a rational way if we have potassium rich soil. So when it comes to quality of the yield in the whole vegetation period of when it comes to kind of the springtime or summer or winter time, there are some periods, of course, of reduction, and the periods of fertilization and reduction, they are somehow correlated. Both kind of, we need to think about the pro-growth factors, both in the entire period of the plant's growth, in the entire year. In Polish conditions, we should have about 10 to 12 fully grown leaves. Why? Because then we have we will have appropriate root and appropriate root system, and these are good conditions. These are good requirements for a good preparation of the plant for winter, and also quick regeneration of the plant after winter. And then, if you look at the weather conditions this year, we had very cool spring, and the rapeseed was going slowly into this spring period. And what would happen if these plants were not well developed? They wouldn't have time to make up for the losses, and then those flowers that we have today, those buds that we have today, there would be a lot fewer of them. So it's important that the foundation for future yield, it's the autumn period when the rapeseed is building it, because then it's not that influenced by the springtime, and that helps the plant to give better yield. So the germination and buds, it happens from the phase of the 8th leaf. So all the plants that do not reach this stage in the autumn period will have to build this entire potential in the spring. And sometimes the weather is not good, and then it's, some bad situations happen. Like this year, where we did not have time in the spring to kind of make up for the growth, the autumn growth. So it's important for the rapeseed to kind of regenerate and accumulate good qualities of nutrients, because today, if the rapeseed is kind of already flowering, then it should benefit from the substances that it has accumulated. And on one hand, that ensures good conditions for good yield, but on the other hand, it also ensures good conditions for the quality of the yield, because if the supply of nitrogen happens a lot after flowering, if if we do add a lot of nitrogen after flowering, the plants will have a lot of leaves, but those new leaves on one hand will be competitive for the pods, will be competitors for the pods. We will have fewer seeds in the pods, and then this will also decrease the quality of the substance itself that we want, and we will also have less oil. One of the parameters positively correlated with the yield is the mass of per thousand seeds. But this mass per thousand seeds is also correlated with the yield of fat. And this mass of 1,000 seeds is shaping up till the harvest. So all errors that we commit in terms of kind of managing our agriculture, and if we have the mass of 1,000 seeds, if it's going to be lower, or if the weather conditions that we'll have, for example, that we had in 2019, where we have heat wave in the June and a lot of rapeseed was burned, and then these conditions are on one hand these are conditions for a lower yield, of course, and on the also will have the worst technological conditions, right? Quality will also drop if we have a heat wave like in 2019. If we look at the mass of hay, rapeseed that does not require 60 kilograms of nitrogen, but also requires other dominant substances like potassium, for example. Here you can see it's higher than nitrogen, because if it fully consumes enough potassium, the nitrogen will be more effective. And if the nitrogen is more effective, then if you kind of estimate the nutritional needs of that plant, you may not assume 60 kilograms of nitrogen, but maybe 50 kilograms of nitrogen. And that will be also related with what? That will be related with the content of oil being bigger and the yield being kind of satisfactory. So, ladies and gentlemen, in order to have the full spectrum of nutrients, we also have to look at macro elements that are in the autumn and in the spring. Boron, molybdenum, manganese. So these are the substances that we need to use in Poland. But the manganese, it's not only improving the nitrogen consumption and nitrogen absorption, but also more oil content, and this should be taken into consideration if we want to have good quality of plants. In the initial period, the rapeseed is generating its biomass slightly slowly in the spring, then it grows, but if you look at the dynamics of accumulation of nitrogen or potassium from the very beginning, we should build conditions for this dynamics to be good. If we look at how nitrogen is accumulated, this dark color is accumulation in leaves, and at some point leaves should be releasing this nitrogen for yield forming parts of the plant, which will help us have better yield and will give us chances to have better quality of yield. And from flowering, part of the leaves should be dropped, and it will not cause a deficit of the nutrient. It's a natural reaction of the rape seed, which has accumulated enough nitrogen. It's just giving it back to those yield forming parts of the plant, and this helps us have appropriate nutrition of plants. I'm showing you this system of roots because rapeseed is building its net root system up to flowering, and if we don't build it in the early spring, we will have new roots, of course, but the decrease of old roots will be the lack of old roots will kind of be there, and before harvest, for example, we will not have enough roots, and we will not have enough roots to fully equip the seeds. We will not have enough mass of 1,000 seeds, and that will cause us not to implement the quality requirement. The next point, weather conditions and the growth of plants. Why did we have problems in Poland when it comes to oil content? important because the sum of effective temperature is decisive. If we look at the autumn period, we assume that in our country, in order to obtain those in a satisfactory coefficient, we kind of you can see the temperatures here on the slide, and we have the influence on the effective temperatures. And what does have influence on this factor? The period of sowing. So if we have longer late autumns, then last year we made an error. For example, have a look at this or these dates. Look at these pictures. You can see southern Wielkopolska region. Look at what happened in at the results. So keep those agrotechnical deadlines for sowing and those terms, appropriate periods for sowing, in order to keep the quality, because then we will have problems. Underdeveloped plants. Sometimes in the winter, we had some winters that, for example, like last year, we've seen that the plant was not really correlated with the weather conditions. If we kind of played around with the sowing periods. Last year, for example, the rapeseed has been flowering on the 10th of April, and for example, we have 28th of April, and we still didn't have flowers on the plantations. When did in Wielkopolska the rapeseed flower? Only last week, which was 10th of 11th May. So we needed heat for the rapeseed to start. And very important thing, if we look at this weather aspect, with this weather aspect, also the supply of nitrogen is correlated. Because if we said that nitrogen is like the superordinate, the most important factor when it comes to the quality of the yield, but we need to know how much nitrogen we have at our disposal, and not many farmers really is aware of that, because we do not do analysis of soil. So here, before we implement appropriate regulation, we need to first of all think about the soil to be fertile, and so that we are aware of how this soil how it's like when it comes to content of nitrogen. And I need to close my presentation right now because we're running out of time. But last thing, if we look at the application periods of nitrogen, the deadlines, the terms of the year when you need to apply it. They need to be sometimes flexible, dependent on changing weather conditions. And just as a plant doesn't know much about politics, if it doesn't have nutrients, it will. If it needs to grow, it grows, and if it doesn't want to grow, it will not grow. But if it grows, it needs to have something to eat, right, to consume, so as to create appropriate yield. And at the very end, a summary. In order to meet the challenges of the European Green New Deal, we need to, on one hand, to cultivate plants which are characterized by high content of fat, resistance or tolerance to pathogens, something that we need to kind of pay attention to. And also my previous speaker mentioned that as well. Effective management of water and nitrogen, so those two factors that limit the yield in Poland. And we need to have big flexibility when it comes to changing weather conditions. And also we need to plant rapeseed on very fertile land. And we can only limit fertilization if we have very fruitful land. But when you talk about the cultivation of rapeseed, we need to have fertile land when it comes to potassium, magnesium, microelements, macroelements, and only then on that we can superimpose some rational fertilization that needs to be adjusted to the needs of yield forming, developmental phase, weather conditions. Another very important issue when it comes to limiting the amount of pesticide, let's give alternatives to farmers. Let's implement, to a bigger extent, those biological substances that increase the fertility of land and also increase the plant's health. But in order to implement them, we need to have these substances tested. They need to be particularly tested in concrete and not on the research stage. And the fifth point, I don't know if you agree with me, but we need to implement rational legal regulations that on one hand will not be kind of against the farmers, but they also need to be against the plants, including rapeseed, because so far we have a number of assumptions that we assumed, but we also need to, when we implement those assumptions, let's hope that, as has been said earlier, let's not make life more difficult for farmers and not to even use more stronger, I don't want to use stronger words, but let's not have a situation that soon we'll have a situation like you go 100 kilometers in Poland, and in May you will not have yellow fields, which will mean that the rapeseed simply didn't manage the legal regulations that have been imposed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor. Great timing. Sorry for the pressure, but that's my role. We need to manage time somehow. I realize that, yes. We have questions from the chat because, of course, the farmers are active, and the first question is, how this year, with this long spring, belated spring, how to influence the quality of the rapeseed? Can we do something when it's flowering already? How to influence its quality? Difficult question. Because Poland is very varied when it comes to weather. You've said earlier that there are some areas where there is a lot of flooding, for example, and flooding might influence roots, which will make seed filling to be problematic. But if I look at Wielkopolska region, for example, I do not see excessive rainfall. I've been collecting samples for analysis, and to be honest, it was very hard to go up to 90 centimeters, and if I did drill up to 90 centimeters, there was no water. So if the rapeseed is flowering in a great yellow color, it's nice. But in order to estimate the yield, we still need some time for that. And water might also influence. We might also experience some pathogens in the future, so we need to monitor this situation, of course, as well. We also need to think about nutritional properties of the rapeseed. So, for example, if you didn't apply fungicidal substances yet, you can use, for example, macro elements like even magnesium sulfate, or you can also apply some other substances, even nitrogen, in such springs like we did have this year. And when these temperatures were not conducive to accessibility of nitrogen from the soil, so we didn't have a lot of minerals being delivered, and the plant couldn't collect it even before flowering, where 70% of the needs of the plant needs to be fulfilled. So in this period of time, you can still use these substances, increase the yield, and positively influence quality. But I do realize that next week, 2 week time, the rape seeds will they will enter another stage, and some farmers want to start applying nitrogen very soon. So I understand that, but we need to make sure that in order to have appropriate yield. Sometimes we didn't even reach 3 or 5%. But we also need to think about, the fact that we will have we will have in certain fertile areas when the temperature goes up, we will have enough intake of nitrogen. So maybe we don't even need to apply that much nitrogen very soon, because we will have more warmer weather and the consumption of nitrogen will be increased from the soil. But in a situation where the leaves have already dropped and we have rainfall, then we can think about that, because we might prolong the seed filling period, and if the better mass of the seeds, the better oil, and the more the oil in it. So a short question, long answer. I can talk about that for a long time. So I'm afraid of asking another question because I just want to short answers. We don't have that much time. So which microelements influence the filling of seeds? Which elements influence on the content of oil in the seeds? Well, there's one conclusion that you might have from my lecture. Apart from the fact that oil content, it starts from from flowering up to the harvest, up till reaching maturity. But to me, yield and oil actually is created even in the autumn, in the entire period of the plant's life. Because if we have a well developed plant with good roots in the autumn, then when the plant is actually flowering and when the oil filling starts into the seeds, then everything will be okay. But if we make mistakes, agrotechnical mistakes, even in the autumn, even in the winter, then nothing will improve the parameters. Because, for example, even substances that like manganese, boron, or molybdenum, they will influence the quality of seeds as well. That was shorter, but I have super short question and I expect a super short answer. Okay, according to you, in your opinion, in rapeseed, in your perspective of Green New Deal, will it maintain its position or will it lose its position? It all depends on what regulations we will implement. I am not a politician, you are not a politician. We can stimulate politicians to kind of hold on and be on the side of the rapeseed. But if the ecological lobby, quote-unquote ecological lobby, the misguided ecological lobby, if they actually take the upper hand, that rapeseed will lose its kind of position. It's not possible to fully ecologically cultivate rapeseed, that, without any kind of fertilizers, any plant protection measures, etc., and maybe that we are just applying small nitrogen, small amounts of fertilizers, maybe even phosphorus, but rapeseed needs macroelements in a particular moment, and if I apply some particular like phosphorite or something like that, or maybe even if kind of allowed chemicals, then I need to be aware that there's a specific absorption of different substances, so it's not really that simple. Okay, thank you. That's a great introduction to our, that's a great scientific approach to our debate. And now we'll soon start the debate with the participation of our experts. But we need to have some chairs on our stage and we need to invite our guests. So I encourage you to maybe drink a cup of coffee, and we in a few minutes will be back with you. Our guest from abroad will be with us, so we can stretch your legs a little bit, and we'll see you in 2 minutes. See you soon.
Szanowni Państwo, witamy. Jak widzicie, czasami różne chochliki się zdarzają. Witamy zatem po krótkiej przerwie. Mam nadzieję, że każdy już ma kawę. My z Juliuszem Modeckim mamy wodę, ale każdy ma to, na co zasłużył. My widocznie tylko na wodę. Oczywiście.
Welcome after the break.
Proszę Państwa, mam nadzieję, że mamy
So I hope we have connections with our guests, and then I would like to welcome Mr. Stefan Arends. Is Mr. Stefan Arends with us? Witam z Niemiec. Hello from Germany. Welcome. I would like Stefan Arends is the vice president of the working group of oil and protein plants Kojeka, and he's the president of the UFO, which is the Association of Rapeseed and Protein Plants Manufacturers in Germany. Let's connect to Claude Sade. Claude Sade, are you with us? Bonjour, monsieur. Are you residing at the south of Paris? Hello, welcome kindly. We have a connection with Mr. Claude, and now we are connecting with Pedro Gallardo. Hello, buenos dias. Buenos dias. Hello. And I need to make a comment. When I was talking to Pedro about a second ago, he's actually preparing his machinery for harvest. So in Andalusia they will be working with the durum already. So some people are already ready for harvest in some parts of Europe. Fantastic. Now let's connect to Mr. Zdenek Linhart. Do we have Mr. Zdenek Linhart with us? Zdenek Linhart from Prague?
Yes, I'm here. How are you?
We are great, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Eurovision this week, I think. So this looks more or less like a Eurovision final here, this discussion of ours. Okay, so we have Zdenek with us, and also I would like to welcome Mr. I hope he's with us. I think the Krzysztof Smaczyński. Director Smaczyński, are you with us? He is with us. Fantastic. Hello. Welcome kindly. Director Smaczyński from the office in Warsaw. What's the weather like in Warsaw? Outside it's pretty sunny, a little bit, but kind of chilly, 17 degrees. Just as we have here, the same weather as in Warsaw is also here. So we are in this. I also need Janusz Modecki. I need to also welcome you here, Juliusz Modecki, who is also today with us, the president of the Association of Protein Plants and Rapeseed Manufacturers, president of the Kojeka Association, and we'll also have Mr. Mariusz Olejnik and Mr. Szeliga, but I will introduce them when we do this quick round of asking questions to our guests, and maybe our foreign guests can maybe listen to what the situation is like in Poland. So maybe Mr. Modecki will start, and he will tell us something more about rapeseed in Poland, and all of you can also maybe tell us for 3 or 4 minutes about the rapeseed cultivation in this season. What's the surface? Do you have any problems, etc., so that our participants in other European countries, so that they can see about what it looks like in this kind of rapeseed cultivation areas around Europe. Okay. In Poland in 2020, 2021, for the first time in history, we had the surface of 1 million hectares, and we assume that this is how much we've been sowing. And so this is very much. We are one of the countries where one of the few countries where the surface has actually increased. Is this the top border? Well, we have some reserves, but when you think about what the professor said, you cannot just plant rapeseed anywhere. It has some requirements. It needs appropriate land, but you also need to have appropriate you need to protect from diseases as well. So 1 million hectares is like this. Maybe there's some 10% buffer that we can increase it by. But I would say that the rapeseed looked well this year. After winter, the conditions were pretty good. The conditions in this autumn were also pretty good. So the development was also beneficial. There were not many losses in the spring period. Despite the colder April, well, there is a delay of, I would say, maybe even about 10 days when it comes to flowering. Now it's in full bloom, it's flowering fully, but it has started flowering only 1 week ago. So at this moment everything is looking good, and what's most important for the plantation owners, the prices this season also look good. These are the highest on record. So we can do contracts, for 2021 at the level of, I would say, 2,400 zlotys. PLN, what, 570 euro about? Yes, more or less. So we haven't had prices like these so far, and we have the possibility to secure the prices. We are also stressing it that, of course, you need to implement the contract and secure the prices in such a way so that the contract could be performed. So to be honest, it looks good. There is a chance that this year the plantation owners will make a lot of money on the rapeseed. Thank you for this optimistic Polish opinion. What about our guests from abroad? Stefan Arends. What about our neighbors, Western neighbors? What is the cultivated surface in Germany? What's the condition of plants in the fields, etc., etc.? Dear Carol, first a few words about the cultivation in Germany. We have slightly less than 1 million hectares. About 100,000. We had very cold period, the coldest period in a number of years, but we assume that also we'll manage to reach a good level of a good yield. It will be around 3.6 tons per hectare, and the European Commission is expecting about 3.8 billion tons even. However, I would like to mention that this is not a level from previous years in Germany. So we had a lot more, and the reason why we don't have such a surface is the weather. It was too dry, and the April was very cold. Also, you know that the level of moisture of land was pretty low. We also had dry spring, which is a new phenomenon. So we need to think about whether this is related to climate change or whether this is like an extreme related to weather, because the yields in Germany is lower than the potential yield. The second reason is surface management on the surfaces where the rapeseed grows. Just as the minister said, this is a very demanding plant. We know that the ban on certain plant protection measures and chemicals has made the situation more difficult. we know that the use of plant protection measures also influences that situation and also influences the attractiveness of cultivating rapeseed. And also an important factors are prices. Julius has mentioned that the situation looks completely different. So in Germany are about 600 euro, and the reserves have been purchased, and many farmers said that they regret that they sold too early for too low prices, but nobody expected the prices to go as high. In 2021 we expect that the prices will be about 580, 520 euro per ton. We know that the rapeseed oil prices have grown, especially in Germany. I hope that this will be a good signal for the 2021 sowing, and we hope that the oil processing representatives will be ready for suggesting higher prices, so that the attractiveness of rapeseed cultivation also in 2021 could grow up. Maybe later in our discussions we can talk a bit more about prices, because we had some critical voices that such prices are too high and that this will have consequences for the consumers, and that they are that there were some comments about the prices. So thank you for that information. We know the situation. When the prices go too much, then all of a sudden the processing companies they complain. That's everywhere the same. Let's go to France, Mr. Claude Saudet. Claude, as you probably heard, the prices are going up, and Matif is ruling the French exchange. We have a European price, to be honest, because it's hard to say that in one country in Europe where you have rapeseed as well as oil, that the prices are not very much different. So what about the cultivation in France? What about the fields in France? What about the market in France? What does it look like, Claude? Thank you very much for introducing me to this conference, and I'm very impressed by these numbers. Especially what Julius said about what it looks like in Poland. The situation is not very complicated when it comes to rapeseed. The prices are good. It's above 600 euros, 630 per ton. So these are the forecasts for future harvest. But for France, for 3 years, in the last 3 years, we had a complicated situation because for several reasons. First of all, the climate. Well, we had a lot of difficulties during sowing because we had a dry spell. You mentioned about the periods of sowing. We usually do it earlier. We sow seeds. We sow earlier to be able to do it before. To manage to outpace the pests, for example. But for France, since summer, there was a lot of dry periods right until autumn, which is not very good for the cultivation of rapeseed. And in the recent years, we were also afraid about prices, because if the prices are good, then when it comes to rapeseed, well, it didn't look that well, because it was good when it comes to other plants, but not necessarily rapeseed. So the producers kind of are a bit afraid of this. But there were also fears when it comes to other things, like for example we had the problems with the markets a little bit, biofuel markets. So the situation is a little bit clearer now, so the perspectives are better, but in the past we had some fears about those markets and demand. So there were some, of course, problems when it comes to plant protection measures in France. For a number of years in France, it's not allowed to use neonicotinoids, which led to a situation that you cannot use many products which we used so far, and this made us so in the areas where there was a lot of production, because of that the production disappeared. Right now we have lower than 1 million hectares. I think maybe lower than 900,000 even, I would say. So Poland will be like the first EU producer, I would say. But we don't expect growth here in France. We don't expect our yield to grow because right now we are below the 3 tons per hectare, so we don't expect the production to grow above 3 tons, maybe slightly, but definitely these will not be numbers that we have reached so far, because the average surface in France 1.4, 1.5, that was kind of, even right now we have even less. So it's surprising that France had to kind of release the the surface. What has replaced the surface of? Was it some other protein plant, or what was this surface, devoted for corn or some other plants? What happened to that surface? In France, the situation was complicated because of what happened in the autumn. We had the sowing problems, and we had also drop when it comes to wheat cultivation. Partly rapeseed was replaced by sunflower. France last year manufactured about 600,000 hectares, and soy as well, 120,000 hectares. That's how much the surface was, but also other plants, like some protein plants. And in France, we also need to mention that what's important, protein plants are important for us. Our goal is to have as best situation possible. In the 80s, for example, we've been growing rapeseed production in France in order to decrease our dependency on imports. Thank you. Now I would like us to move to Madrid. So I know that the more south we go, the more difficult it is to be competitive for rapeseed with other oil plants. In Madrid we have Pedro Gallardo. Pedro, what about your situation in Spain? How much rapeseed are you actually planting? I know that olive oil is probably dominant, but I understand that in the north there is some rapeseed oil, right, in the fields. Thank you very much for the question. This is a very interesting, and yeah, indeed, Spain has some cultivation of rapeseed, but we do plant, but of course we focus on olive oil. And another aspect is that the production of sunflower. So when it comes to rapeseed, we don't have a huge area, about 60,000 hectares. Earlier that was a bit more, but these areas are dropping when it comes to rapeseed. When it comes to Spain, the cultivation is kind of dropping because of huge changes in our structures of plant cultivation and agricultural structures. It's definitely it's changing, and we have changes even in the processing, manufacturing sectors. In 1981, for example, we had some cases related to, for example, even poisoning of rapeseed oil, which led to very serious damages and of the very image of rapeseed oil, because it was poisoned. There were many cases of mass poisoning, and from that point on, the cultivated area has been dropping. We, of course, are suffering droughts. It's very hot right now. We have 42 degrees already in June. So that's very negative. And in relation to that, we had to implement appropriate tools that will allow us to save those plants and the agriculture, because it's very hard to cultivate in such conditions, such difficult conditions. When it comes to prices, first of all, the most benefits they are most beneficial in relation to sunflower, because rapeseed is actually fighting with sunflower. There's a big competitor, and we never win with sunflowers. So most farmers would rather decide to cultivate sunflowers, because also rapeseed requires better conditions, and without these appropriate conditions, the cultivation doesn't give that same yield. Because if we cultivate rapeseed and do it wrong, nothing will really work. For us farmers, this is a cultivation that we like, because it's very interesting alternative. Every farmer has to have in their kind of range of possibilities. They need to have some alternatives. In Spain, we do have rapeseed. Earlier we had a lot more of it. Right now, it's not as big, not as popular, but it is a certain alternative that we can turn to and use. So is this dropping surface cultivation area of cultivation, and the dropping surface of rapeseed cultivation, is it dropping because of the scandals of poisoned rapeseed, or is it related to maybe or climate changes and lack of water? And what would you say? Maybe there are some droughts, of course, happening at the very crucial points in the rapeseed cultivation. So, what do you think is the biggest factor? The main reason is not necessarily the poisoning, the mass poisoning scandals in the early 80s. Up till 2010, we had almost 800,000 hectares, and at that point, we had a pretty stable. The situation was pretty stable. But right now, we might say that from that point on, we are lacking tools to appropriately cultivate the rapeseed. Farmers would rather decide to plant sunflower. Here we have also only some varieties that we can plant that we can cultivate in the winter, maybe, because we have very hot summers. I understand that the next Eurorzepak days we will probably connect to sunflowers if the climate in Poland changes as well. But all of you gentlemen represent your countries in the kind of protein and oil seed plants, so we'll also probably talk about other plants as well. Now we move to Prague, maybe a bit more to the north of Madrid, but still south of Minkovo. Zdenek Linhart, what about the situation in the Czech Republic when it comes to cultivation of rapeseed? We know that just as in Poland, you are southern neighbor. You had it's pretty strong, right? I think when it comes to the income for farmers, I think.
Yes, thank you, Karol. Czech Republic is much smaller than France, Germany, Poland, and Spain, but still, oilseed rape is very popular crop here. you may judge it according to its acreage. Recently, it's about 340,000 hectares.
Oj, coś mamy zakłócenie w połączeniu. Czy mamy Zdenka ponownie?
Yes, Zdenek, are you with us? Can we hear you?
Yes, yes. I hear also translation, and it's quite delayed, so I will continue. This 340,000 hectares, it's a brand new number from today. We have planned to have 350, and acreage of oilseed rape is decreasing in the last 3 years, in the average about 5%.
What about prices and the condition of plants? Are there any problems, or would you say that the situation is just as good as in Poland? As Juliusz Modecki has earlier mentioned, in Poland we cannot complain because the rapeseed is looking pretty good in Poland.
Yes, oilseed rape looks quite good. Prices are promising, but in reality, there is no stock of oilseed rape in the storage. Therefore, these prices are only on paper or internet now. So we are very happy that prices of oilseed rape look so promising, but also inflation is increasing, and we will have to relate increase of prices of oilseed rape with the increase of prices of all other inputs and all other markets. For example, increase of real estate markets is about 20% per year during last 4-5 years. So if you relate increase of price of oilseed rape with other markets, it's not so much.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would say that we have a pretty good picture of what the situation looks like. So let's move on to the main topic of our international debate. So before us lies Green New Deal and the strategy from farm to fork and biodiversity. So, as I said in the introduction, many countries are forming their strategic plans, and in a few days, European Parliament, as part of the trilogue, will has to specify the main assumptions behind what? The reduction of the plant protection measures, reduction of fertilization, the conditions, and eco schemes. So this all goes hand in hand, as mentioned by many experts. This all goes into in the direction of decrease of efficiency of farming, the increase of intensity of farming in the EU. Rapeseed is an intense, demanding plant. So, what does this mean for the future of rapeseed? If we were to fulfill these conditions of Green New Deal, like limit the plant protection measures usage and limit the use of fertilizers. Now, maybe in reverse order, so as not to give preference to different other neighbors, maybe I would like Mr. Pedro Gallardo, who is the president of the working group on oiling plants and protein plants in Copa Cogeca, because I understand that this debate in the recent weeks and months will be key, and especially its results will be key in terms of the decisions that will be binding for the next 7 years of common agricultural policy. Pedro? Thank you, Karol. Thank you very much for your question.
Słyszymy Pedro, bo my nie mamy go na podsłuchu.
During the pandemic, I would like to repeat that I would like to answer that question. In the pandemic days, it was not a priority for the European Commission to deal with this topic, but we know that limits will be introduced when it comes to the production methods, because there are two strategies that are being prepared. For example, while being on the side of the farmers, I'm also looking at the European Green New Deal, and I see that these two strategies that the agricultural commissioner is talking about, he talked about farm to fork strategy and biodiversity. We understand that farming has been kind of in a way traded, I would say. It has been become like a token that can be traded for political means, and this will have an actual effect on the yield and harvest. We do not want this influence to be negative on all member states of the European Union, and we cannot accept that. So if we face a situation that this influence will be significant on our harvest, then the productivity will drop by about 7 to 12%, and this will be the effect of the influence of those strategies of the European Green New Deal. So 12% losses. So 60% will be the drop of income of our farmers in Europe, and this will also be visible in prices and accessibility to consumers. The prices will increase year on year, and also this will be visible in the pockets of individual consumers. So we are studying the influences, and we think that maybe we'll lose 13-17% of yield when it comes to corn. We'll also have significant losses when it comes to plants that we produce oil from. About 11 million inhabitants annually will be affected by these changes in relation to the price increase and drop of productivity. Because we want to feed the world, we think that this is not a good direction to go. We have a lot of complications because Vice President of the European Commission, Timmermans, is trying to implement new strategies which are kind of being forced by, which are forcing some agendas during, which are, some negotiations are actually trying to put forth and force through some strategies which are not beneficial to farmers and consumers. But these are not this is not legislation. These are just strategies which will be implemented by legislation. So I personally, I'm under the impression that if we are supposed to put those limits on, this will also limit the production of plants. Thank you very much. Now I would like you to have short speeches, because after 2 minutes, like in the European Parliament, well, we will not switch off the microphone, but please short answers. Zdenek in Prague now. Zdenek, do you see these threats when it comes to those new strategies, and do you, maybe in Czech Republic, are you kind of moving closer to specifying the level from which the limitation of plant protection measures and fertilizers is supposed to be imposed? So do we know something about more concrete numbers in Czech Republic and limits?
I would start with the example. Our union has participated in a competition of many fertilizer and chemicals producers in Sweden a year ago. and our union has reached the best efficiency in Sweden. We are definitely not well aware of the climatic conditions, but this first position in profitability shows what is possible even with a decreased content of used pesticides and fertilizers. So we are not so much aware of this decrease which European Commission is asking for. What we are afraid is from which ground or level that decrease will be calculated. It means if we have so low consumption of pesticides and fertilizers already now, if they will push us to subtract more from this level, we will get into serious troubles.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Claude Saudet now about the drop of cultivated area. I know that the farmers were not able there in his country. The farmers could not really make themselves heard about derogation regarding neonicotinoids, and this was one of the important factors that prevented the fighting of pests. So if we reduce the number of plant protection measures, we do not know what's going to happen because we do not know what kind of pests may appear. And Claude, do you also see some threats when it comes to those strategies? If both of these strategies are pushed forward? Thank you for the question. The threats in the future will be there, but they will also happen very soon. The situation, of course, is different in different countries when it comes to the permits for the use of different pesticides. In France, we have limited the consumption of pesticides, so there are certain threats about what will this bring. So the strategy are still being discussed. In Brussels, there is a debate regarding permits for like this one substance that is pretty important to fight off autumn pests. And if that substance, if that particle disappears, that we will not have an alternative. Right now we have 250 million hectares of area, cultivated area that's of rapeseed that's kind of threatened. And this is a current threat. This is not about the future. So we're actually asking a question what to do. We are looking at what's happening, and our request is to do so that we have an alternative, so that we have solutions for the problems that we have right now. And these might be, you know, maybe different varieties, different active substances, or some other plant protection measures. One more remark when it comes to fertilizers. It's not a matter of amount of fertilizers used. It's because the amount used will, well, a lot of this will be flushed out, but the problem is what amount to use so that it is appropriate. For example, let's take an example of rapeseed. If we better protect in a certain period of time the rapeseed, it will be better in the future for it, and then we can use less pesticides on the condition that we can use the appropriate amount of fertilizers. So if we have a ban on fertilizers, it would be hard to reach that situation. Yes, so there are different the different institutes, scientific institutes are working and analyzing it. So do you have a support from the side of science to analyze this correlation? So this integrated agricultural production and its requirement will be so high, the requirements will be so high that without great knowledge it will be hard for agricultural farmers to kind of meet those demands of this new agricultural policy. In France, we have developed such organizations, and producers have organized themselves to create technical universities which ensure financing. Right now, these institutes are working on finding solutions to these questions, but this definitely will take some time, and definitely we need to check agricultural practices. Maybe we'll also need to prolong the rotation and crop rotation, and maybe we are also working on a solution that that is checking the correlation between rapeseed cultivation with other plants, which perhaps might be also cultivate more intensively to strengthen the rapeseed. And institutes are actually working on that, but we also need to remember, maybe in the future they will tell us, oh, you cannot use this substance anymore. But then, of course, we need some time to kind of switch to find some other alternative solution. So our basic worry is that right now rapeseed is now giving good perspectives, and our fear is how how to enrich these, our production so as to be able to use new varieties, new cultivation, new plants, and what kind of measures should we actually use to help us grow rapeseed appropriately and efficiently. Stefan Arends is waiting for us in Berlin. We know that an important voice in the EU debate is imposed by representatives of different green parties. In recent years, in Germany and France, the green parties have been growing in pressure, and they are having bigger pressure to kind of to remove chemicals from agriculture. What does it look like from the perspective of Berlin, and are these threats for the cultivation of rapeseed by reducing by 50%, for example, of chemical substances, and also additionally limiting the list of active substances, because these are two important factors? Are you actually able to reverse this trend, or maybe even or can we not reverse it at all? Stefan, how do you see that? Thank you for this question. I would like to start from the issue of the green parties. In German press, we read a lot about the fact that in the September or in the beginning of next year, we will have a green chancellor. From my experience, from the experience that I gathered in different German federal states, when the Green Party is already, like in Baden-Württemberg, the Green Party is already there in the parliament, and when the Greens are already in some local authorities, when they behave pretty reasonably. So this, however, doesn't mean that that their knowledge of agriculture is growing, but it turns out that some goals are not as easy to implement as they might think. When it comes to the requirements of the Commission, it seems that the problem of the Green Deal and its farm to fork strategy is that we only know the general policy. We do not know particular policies that will, and strategies and goals that will be implemented. So what we should know is, we should know the framework of all of this, especially in the context of a common agricultural policy. And we need to know what details will and what consequences will follow. Julius probably mentioned that the committee in the very beginning should analyze the effects of these decisions on agriculture. When it comes to consequences, especially for rapeseed, we know some studies, but we also need to do more studies to see what the results on rapeseed will be like. We are waiting for the results of the studies and research. Of course, there is some potential to reduce the plant protection measures. We have already seen that on the diagrams, especially in the autumn period, we can actually perform some optimization. And when it comes to the list of allowed substances, well, many substances has already been banned, and this transition will be difficult. So, so this is something that definitely will influence us, and we definitely will need to kind of use crop rotation more extensively and think about biological substances. We also need to apply new varieties and apply new methods. I think that the cultivation of rapeseed will not suffer that much as people might think, especially if you consider more extended crop rotation. But I think that the cultivation of rapeseed will be stable because it will be included in this crop rotation system. Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you for at least one optimistic sentence. But in many regions of Germany, where rapeseed has increased 30% in its structure of sowing, we had a lot of health problems, and there was problem with keeping those crops. So I think that we are approaching, especially in those best positions and in those best areas, we are approaching a certain threshold of system volume, because there's not much more that you can fit in there. Maybe I can add something. Yes, I think this is actually true. There were some areas, like right now, we have 1 million hectares of rapeseed. We had 1.5 million in the past, in the beginning of 2000s, especially the regions that are suitable for rapeseed. This is where the rapeseed was cultivated. Right now, in those areas, we have very resistant pest, unfortunately, which has negative consequences. So I think I am a huge supporter of using extended crop rotation. Our association is also for it, for the rapeseed to be responsible for 10% of crop rotation. And also in total we have 12 million hectares of arable land, so 10% would be 1.2 hectare. So this is a good level for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I was talking in the context of this limitation with Professor Marek Mrówczyński, the director of Plant Protection Institute in Poznań, National Research Institute. And I would like you to listen to the expert and how expert evaluates the threats, which is the threats related to plant protection measures and reducing them by 50%. Can you play the movie? I shortened it for a little bit for our needs.
Taki, że ubędzie preparatów. Preparatów będzie mniej, dlatego że Unia Europejska każe stosować o połowę mniej chemii w ochronie roślin. To jest bardzo dużo i to spowoduje trudności w ochronie roślin, rzepaku. Największym problemem będzie zwalczanie szkodników, bo teraz mamy zmiany klimatyczne, jesień trwa aż prawie do stycznia, co powoduje, że szkodniki więcej atakują i niszczą rzepak. I dlatego największy problem jest nie wiosna rzepaku przed szkodnikami, tylko jesień, czyli brak zapraw nasiennych. I tak często teraz bywa niestety, bo Unia Europejska już nie pozwala, żeby były tak zwane derogacje dla zapraw nasiennych i dlatego są problemy z ochroną. W Polsce na całe szczęście mamy 2 zaprawy nasienne zarejestrowane z innej grupy niż
registered, which are not neonicotinoids, but they work for a short period of time because European Union also in the rape, long-lasting substances is withdrawing. So there's no chances that the treatment, there's no more treatments. The chemical groups are decreasing, treatments are decreasing, which is making agrophags to be more and pests to be more resistant. So we will have problems because there's no turning back when it comes from those. Well, we need to have short-term treatments, chemical treatments. We need that. We need those. And also EFSA is saying the same thing. Also organization that's giving opinions on the plant protection measures. So EFSA, however, is removing all long-lasting chemicals, like petroids, which are working on pests, which are long-lasting ones. And they are systematically withdrawing. This year in August, we will have withdrawal of those substances also. And we will also, glyphosate will be withdrawn for sure in the next year and a half. For rapeseed, probably maybe it will be still left to fight weeds, but we'll have a problem because we will not have herbicides like glyphosate because EU is those substances actually want to remove, and we have more and more, for example, like varieties of weeds that are becoming more and more resistant. Some of them we can remove without chemistry, however. We also have some varieties of rapeseed that actually are resistant to certain diseases, and like for example 50 varieties resistant to some dangerous diseases, but those are more expensive, and they are even 3 times more expensive per hectare sometimes. So within the common agricultural policy we need to have support to those who actually apply those latest resistant varieties, and this is a big problem. But we can also use biological preparations, and EU is actually encouraging them. There are several ones, but they are 5 times per hectare more expensive to the chemical ones, and this is something that we need to have the support of the European Union. It's easiest to use preparations that are safe for bees, like for example those that are safe for bees, but they need to be used only in the evening after the bees have already flown and at night, because for now, for example, there are some pests that are not there is not enough resistance sometimes to some pests. So maybe we'll have biological varieties, biological substances, but they are the future, but they are still being researched. So hopefully we'll have preparation also in chemicals that are not affecting bees. But also we have another problem. We need to apply them at night, and the cost is also the problem. The cost is a problem because the price of rapeseed is growing. The cultivated surface in Europe and EU is decreasing, and this is a big problem because according to the research that has been presented by Kleffman 6 years ago, the drop of yield will be about half. So if we decrease the use of chemical substances for protection, so last year the Agriculture Ministry in US has given in the report that introduction of Green New Deal will cause in the European Union the decrease of rapeseed by 1/3. So this is a lot, and this will influence, unfortunately, the self-sufficiency of the European Union when it comes to rapeseed oil. So these are the experts' opinion, and the Ministry of Agriculture of the US which is observing what's happening in the European Union, and if the professor has quoted well, in his report he said that the US is observing the EU, so we are risking 1/3 of our production by these policies. And I would like to encourage to our debate also the vice chairman of the Department of Climate and Plant Protection in the Ministry of Agriculture, Mr. Krzysztof Smaczyński. Can you hear us? Yes, we can hear you. I can hear you, and your friends also was able to hear you. I know that the ministry is working on details. Can you tell us how will it look like in the executive provisions when it comes to plant protection measures? Will the rapeseed farmers are supposed to be afraid of something? I think that on this stage you're asking questions that are too difficult for me because I do not have that enough information. When I was listening to previous speakers, I have to say again what Stefan said from Germany. In reality, right now we're debating about general goals, political goals. They've been set out for the first time last year, almost exactly a year ago, but the pandemic has this entire debate basically strongly kind of decreased, and this debate was kind of went away for a while. And in general, this general position regarding goals and reduction doesn't allow, is not allowing us to have a clear debate to those who are on the market and who are interested in it, because only the detailed provisions will kind of, we will be able to address them and kind of refer to them, and then we will be able to somehow comment on how the kind of qualitative provisions, what they are, and when we have them, we will be able to address them. The general position is expressed in 3 pillars. The first pillar is all changes have to be preceded by honest analysis, impact analysis. Without a reliable impact analysis, we are not able to set out borders and talk in a clear way with all participants of the market. Yes, that's the second thing. Yes, but we need to secure food, we need to ensure food security. COVID is showing clearly that farmers and the entire food sector during the pandemic, well, they actually passed the exam. Europeans haven't suffered when it comes to food deliveries. And when we look broadly from, microprocessors, masks, chips, other steel, other products, we see that supply chains were really stretched and broken, and what influence it had on those sectors. And also the third pillar, also competitiveness. So it can't be in like we in Europe are setting up for ourselves high norms, high environmental and climate norms. That's good that we're going in this direction, but we also should expect from food suppliers who are supplying it to European market from other places, we should require that the production is also done in a similar way. Like in France, for example, we have an open debate in France about the so-called middle clauses. President Macron has been talking about it, where clearly we see that if we limit the food production in Europe, then we can also contribute to tropical forests being cut out or other global changes being made. Therefore, today, when it comes to those detailed discussions, I think it's slightly too early before your Commission presents some results. Sorry for breaking, but there's a question. You are very close to the ministry, and in the ministry they are observing those national strategic plans. And so I think a year ago in Minikowo, the Commissioner Janusz Wojciechowski said that in Poland we should feel safe because those high levels regard the countries that are using a lot more plant protection measures. But in reality, in Europe, nobody knows where the barrier is and where the threshold is. So if we talk about details, well, we kind of need to know what the threshold is, what the detail. So maybe you know something about it, because soon we will move on to our friends from other countries and maybe they know something more. At what level or from what level are we talking about? Because, you know, I like your the Mr. Director's response, because there was a mention about, you know, there's nothing to be afraid of, but is that really the case? We're not sure. Well, the quantitative thresholds presented to us are kind of ambitious, because right up till 2030 we have some limits of natural development in which our agriculture can go. But these limits, -50, -20, also in a general way, we do not know how will that translate into detailed kind of goals, because we need to know what the particular documents are, especially those responsible for integrated farming and precision farming. We will be able to talk about them in more detail later. But for the needs of the general purpose, we have told our research institutes to do some initial examination and research, and we will have some first drafts of reports very soon that will show us the kind of quantitative and qualitative possibilities of what can be done. And I need to comment on what Mr. Pedro has said, who said that actually he presented for today kind of some summaries and what the research what has been done in Spain, and yeah, so he's already they have already done some research there. So if you can find them online and read more. So maybe we can find them somewhere online, and maybe what kind of methods, what approach and calculations, what kind of methods they used. So that was very interesting. So in short, the details are made in Brussels, and we are all expecting this kind of transition from this debate that has you know, a very political, it's still very political, but we want some more details, because then when we have more details, we can actually translate that into some conversation about rapeseed. So I'm happy that our forum here is a place where we can discuss a bit and open some topics that will be relevant for this discussion, because as Minister Arlenowski has said, there's a high level of ideological approach, and what we need is, we need particulars, we need concrete things, and as part of the trilogue, I think there is supposed to be a understanding between Council, Commission and Parliament. So Mr. Juliusz, what do you think it means if this limitation enters into force? How will it affect our production? Should we be afraid? Or maybe we are afraid and we shouldn't be afraid. So all those who were... My friends have basically said everything. Their observations are very accurate. The same situation that we have abroad will also be present in Poland. I want to focus on two things. We need to encourage Ministry of the Environment to talk about competitiveness and maybe the viability, economic viability of our production, because that's important for agricultural farmers. We also need to think about, we're talking about some buzzwords like farm to fork, like biodiversity. Biodiversity is nothing else but crop rotation. Crop rotation has been come up in the middle of the 19th century, so that's nothing new. But to implement crop rotation, biodiversity, we need to have tools, and tools are the plants that we can use efficiently with some agricultural common sense. Rapeseed is a great element of crop rotation, but it's not enough. If we want to protect ourselves against the pressure of pests, and if we really want to limit a number of nitrogen, or generally generally, nitrogen, for example, we need to kind of use more types of plants like that from the same subgroups. We thought that we could plant these plants on the EFA land, like for example Fabaceae, but we cannot just treat plants as if they are not part of a context. We need to look at the context if we want to limit the consumption of fertilizers and keep the production up. We need to plant those plants that help us reduce the use of nitrogen, for example, like Fabaceae plants, for example. And we are actually talking about that. Agriculture is like one big whole. It's not just individual things, plants and elements. Mr. Mariusz Olejnik is the president of a Polska rapeseed manufacturing group, and he's also a farmer who is farming rapeseed. Okay, I can hear you. I hope you were able to hear the debate. So, from the perspective of the region, your region, a strong region when it comes to rapeseed cultivation, Silesia and Opolszczyzna region, how do you see the limitations resulting from the assumptions of the Green New Deal? How will they translate into, what consequences will they have for the farmers? It's hard to talk about the details, like Krzysztof Smaczyński has mentioned. I am not so optimistic though. Rapeseed is a very cost-demanding, very intensive cultivation, and it will feel the most those principles of Green New Deal, or it will feel the most the plant protection measures limitations. So we need to have a very comprehensive model of approaching the thresholds set by the EU. Protein plants can be another plant that will that can break the crop rotation, but if we start doing it, if we expand the production, we will clash with the surplus of seeds of protein plants. In order, I don't know if you can hear me. Yes, the surplus, I do not think that we will have, when it comes to soy imports, I don't think we will have a surplus of of these sorts of plants. Well, yes, I know, but in order to connect the Fabaceae plants, and we need to connect it with the cultivation of rapeseed. In rapeseed, there are some factors that are not dependent on us, because we wait for modern fertilizers, we wait for biological plant protection measures. This is not dependent on us. So what can we do? We can do some passive sowing. We can do some stretch sowing on a given stretch of land, for example. And for example, if you modify like one of the eco schemes, and instead of having 25% in the structure of Fabaceae plants to about 10%, then maybe in some perspective other plants from year to year will have the possibility of having more nitrogen, for example, from the Fabaceae plants, and we can compose, or we can kind of incorporate some part, and we can incorporate these limitations. So we need, so to sum up, we would need, this is a good moment to stabilize the production of Fabaceae plants, and using those plants for fodder and introducing modern technologies, for example, of modern fertilizers and modern plant protection measures. But in Poland we have a problem because we have derogation for neonicotinoids several years. We reached 1 million hectares and we will have next season without it. We do not know, we do know how it happened in France. So we might be in for a surprise, right? Yes, if we don't manage this season with pests, right? We don't manage the pests this year, of course. If we have 1 million hectares and if we have these prices, then it may happen that we will sow a lot again, but this will be first test without neonicotinoids. So there are some substances, but not used broadly. So I think that we may stabilize the use of protein plants by introducing a European indicator, like in the case of biofuels. So we cannot eliminate soy imports entirely, but definitely we are able to ensure at least partial independence of protein plants in the context of improving crop rotation, decreasing the use of nitrogen, because in the plants which will follow the Fabaceae plants, we could use less nitrogen. Now we will connect to President Mariusz Szeliga from the Polish Association of Oil Producers. Do we have a connection? We do not have a connection with him. So if there is such a possibility, because it would be interesting to see what the manufacturers, how manufacturers see the possibility of getting the resource next year. So in Poland, the processing of rapeseed has increased from 1 million to 1 million to 3 million tons. So maybe Juliusz Mudecki can answer instead of Mr. Riga. So the industry that has actually been growing a lot, will they have fuel to grow? Will they have the resource to grow? So what do you think? But just briefly. So I said in the beginning that we are approaching 1 million hectares. Plantations look good, so everything seems to point that way. Of course, we still need 2 months for crops to be harvested, so we have a lot of work in front of us. But we have first two markets, food markets, and the rest will be used by industry for technical biofuels, technical needs in biofuels. So industry will have resource this year, assuming that the on stock amount of this substance is pretty much zero. So there is nothing on stock. Now let's talk about two aspects. If we don't have plant protection measures, and if there are fewer of them, Professor Mowczyński has mentioned this, then a solution would be to have resistant plants. So, Claude Saudet, when we discussed before today's meeting, he mentioned that in Europe, we need to allow modern cultivation technologies that will give us an answer to what happens if we have a very short list of plant protection measures and growing resistance. Claude, could you tell us what are the chances so that in our range of varieties, so that we have more varieties resistant to both the pests and diseases as well as climate changes? I think there are possibilities but we need some time. Because we can't find solutions that can be used immediately, but this assumes that we'll have changes in the EU regulations, and I think that maybe also farmers will change their activity, so this will be very dynamic situation. We need to find such solutions which will allow to answer the needs and manage the fact that we have to limit the amount of plant protection measures, but also we need to have allowed such methods which will be beneficial for farmers. We need to apply varieties which are resistant to diseases, but many of our opponents claim that these varieties are like GMO, and they are a strong opposition, and they are opposing to the use of these types of plants varieties. So we need to have such regulation which will allow the acceleration of the selection of such types, such varieties which will be best suited and which will be the best. So we need to work quickly. Some varieties are more resistant, some are less resistant to aggressive pests, but we need to act quickly. This is a big challenge. Also, challenge in terms of communication, social challenge. So, what selection, what plants, of what new technologies, in what direction this will evolve, in order to answer a certain number of challenges that still face us. In France, there are some attempts also of the French government who is ready to veto such varieties, and all of this will be based on regulation, of the Supreme Court. I hope that I managed to answer your question. Yeah, so we are discussing about these issues because we need to realize that on one hand, if the committee is limiting plant protection measures and on the other hand not allowing to cultivate resistant varieties, how do we answer the threats? And this is interesting because there's always a country that's a pioneer in some solution. And now what's interesting is what kind of arguments do the opponents have? Like mutagenesis, for example, of these new varieties that largely increase the progress of the how we can protect, what kind of measures can we have to protect ourselves against these pests? To answer that question, I need to go back because this is a matter of competition. We cannot, in a country in the middle of European Union, we cannot impose in the European Union regulations which which deal with import measures. So there are some kind of global issues, but the EU Commission needs to be a bit tolerant. The EU Commission has like this positive approach when it comes to new technologies, and also has been a bit afraid of them, but generally they are positive, and they started a debate with particular countries, with the parliament. Now the arguments of the opponents are the following. Now, if we are performing some selection of techniques, then we are doing it like a wizard. And this will have an important influence on nature, and maybe we will not be able to control it. So there's also another issue when we look at this biological approach, like this biological cultivation, those biocultivation, bioagriculture, we cannot talk about imposing biological production on others when it is actually a topic that we kind of should talk about. I think that society is facing a choice. It can pick one or the other model, and I think that it's important to kind of conduct a debate like this so as to have research about it, to understand each other and have mutual understanding. Yes, thank you for this thesis. Unfortunately, we cannot go deeper into this topic, but I would like to touch upon some other issues. Or maybe Juliusz Wadecki would like to mention something about new cultivation technologies and the possibility of replacing with new varieties, replacing those lacking chemical solutions. Let's not forget about one basic thing. We have some assumptions, but the farmers are manufacturing here and now, today. And if you tell them, you cannot use this, you cannot use plant protection measures, decrease fertilizers, but an alternative is new varieties which will be tolerant, which will be resistant to these disease. But there are no such varieties. So now we're supposed to limit it, but we don't have any other varieties right now. So there will be in future, but not right now. So this should be taken into consideration, because you will have a situation where the food that we will offer them will be a lot more expensive. Thank you. Now I would like to pay attention to two more aspects. Biodiversity. Biodiversity is an element which we hear a lot about in the context of, eco schemes. So, quick question. Is the cultivation of rapeseed in the context of biodiversity, is it a problem or a solution? Juliusz Wadecki. Of course it's not a problem, it's a solution. I talked about it earlier in my earlier speech. There's no alternative for these kind of agricultural farms, and the new assumptions of the common agricultural policy say that if we implement biodiversity, we need to, and I think we cannot do it without rapeseed. Zdenek Lichard in the Czech Republic, in the context of biodiversity, is it a problem, is it a solution? Zdenek, very quickly, because we have two more things to talk about.
My answer is very brief. We needn't to talk about opinions. We can look at our fields, and we see from the history that oilseed rape was always popular, but and farmers know it, but some other people from the public cannot understand to it. So I think we have very firm evidence that the oilseed rape is a solution, not a problem.
Thank you very much. Stefan Arends now. What about Germany? What about the role of rapeseed in the biodiversity complex? You know that the flowering rapeseed is like not only threat for bees, but also one of the more benefits for bees, without which we would not have thousands of tons of honey in Europe. For me, this is a very important answer. I think rapeseed is basically a solution in the issue of biodiversity. And you have already mentioned this, Karol has mentioned this, that you mentioned bees and this kind of bee discussion. It's assumed that it has negative effects on the bees, and actually it's actually the opposite. Rapeseed is one of the most important sources of nourishment for bees, and also the Inca knows this, and there is an open cooperation between, for example, in Germany we cooperate. The beekeepers and the rapeseed producers are actually cooperating. However, there are some groups of people who are actually telling us that there are some problems with rapeseed and bees, and I would like to just briefly mention this, that this discussion in the open public needs to be really honest, and we actually need to talk about the farming technologies. And I don't think that we have an honest discussion in the public. Instead of us, usually the consumers clearly are being said that. For example, the cultivation of rapeseed is should be limited, but this is not good. What does it mean? This means that the whole domestic protein production will decrease, that we will not have enough substances for ourselves, and also we will be reliant on imports, and also the prices will go up. So this is also needs to be cleared to many people, and because people are saying, oh, first of all, we need new technologies of cultivation, we need some more time it's all related to climate change, etc., etc. And when it comes to biodiversity, and I think that we need this, and so as in order to we need those new types of new varieties of healthy varieties to be able to cultivate healthy rapeseed. Thank you, Stefan. One of questions came to me from the chat, and I have that question to Claude. Is it true that in France some beekeeper societies are actually telling us that we need to restore neonicotinoids so as to increase the rapeseed cultivation? And my question, in the context of biodiversity, is rapeseed a problem or a solution? Claude. It's clearly a solution. Bee needs rapeseed, rapeseed needs bees. So this is the first plant that bees have access to in the beginning of spring. And thanks to this, the colonies of bees can grow, and then they can switch to other plants. And we also need bees to actually help. We need rapeseed to help bees, and bees need rapeseed. And actually, professional bees are necessary for pollinating rapeseed, right? So we need them. And we cooperate with beekeepers and honey manufacturers. We try to cooperate with them, and we try to show them that you can actually build, you can actually keep bees and hives next to fields. So there are debates and discussions to promote rapeseed and to show that there actually is no negative influence on bees. So it's all about, we want to have more debate, we want to spread knowledge and not, not have just so-called bee protectors who refuse all pesticides at all and don't accept any pesticides because it will kill bees. So if we intelligently manage production, there is no risk. Thank you very much. In this entire debate regarding the role of rapeseed cultivation, we shouldn't forget about the issue of CO2 binding agriculture. We say that agriculture is emitting a lot of carbon, but you forget about the fact that plants, especially the intense ones, are actually binding a lot of carbon. I would like to ask Pedro Calardo, the boss of the work group of oil and protein farmers association. Would you say that maybe this is a tool and a weapon for us to say that we are actually fighting for better climate by binding carbon? Because forestry and agriculture, we are tying up a lot of carbon from the atmosphere, and we are cleaning the atmosphere, cleaning the air. Pedro. Thank you very much. This is an important question. In fact, the truth is that farmers are contributing to we are focusing on the sequestration of CO2. There is no company or city which would actually transfer CO2 into oxygen. We are doing it. We are doing that work, and it's very important, and we need to stress it. So, rapeseed is very important because it is a sustainable development. It supports, on one hand, bees and also sequesters CO2 to a large extent, I would say. Another important thing I would like to address is what you mentioned earlier. Probably in the future we'll even have to concentrate more on the genetic modification to prevent climate change. We have a lot of manufacturers of honey who want to replace the sunflower cultivation by rapeseed because it strengthens their production. So we talk about protein plants, and just as Mr. Łukasz emphasizes, who refers to our discussion on the chat, if we have limited access to plant protection measures, it will also make it more difficult to protect the protein plants because they are requiring also protection against weeds. And if you know that if we have, there are weeds and there are more diseases, there are more pests, and so if you have no plant protection measures, so in order to ensure this protection, well, you need to have some tools in your arsenal. Let's talk about oxygen carbon sequestration. Claude Sodet, have you heard about that some oil manufacturers are marking oil as neutral when it comes to CO2 emission? What is that trend? How much in this discussion with the consumers should we use this argument and show them that we are not destroying the environment, but we are helping to clean it? So, Claude. I think that what I can say is that the photosynthesis is causing sequestration of CO2. The more biomass, the more sequestration, the more carbon capture, and that's a big advantage. So of course this requires that there is more cultivation and to capture the CO2. So this is an effect that we can achieve, like a benefit that we have to show. But also we can limit emission of CO2, and this is something that even now will happen in France, for example. Right now we're doing this, so we are using such practices of cultivation so as to limit the emission of CO2 during cultivation. Today we are already introduced a system that tracks which producer emits how much CO2, and we can give incentives to the right ones, which is good for the market, because we capture CO2 and produce a little CO2, for example, in production and transportation, etc. And we are also using biodiesel in 100%, almost 100% in the production of rapeseed. So we also decrease the CO2 emission. So rapeseed has a lot of benefits, and we need to emphasize it. And found a way to communicate that message. I was slightly pessimistic in the beginning of this conference, but right now I would say I am optimistic, because there are some solutions that are waiting for us. Right, great. So French became optimistic thanks to the conference. Nice. Let's also increase the acreage and how much land you can use for rapeseed. Maybe you will manage to increase the cultivation of rapeseed as well. Yes, the market, there are two markets. Food industry, well, Spain has olive oil, they don't want rapeseed. But on the other hand, we have fuel market, and in the European discussion, also in the context of common agricultural policy, we are discussing about renewable sources of energy. And how do you, gentlemen, see the future of rapeseed oil for energy purposes in terms of Green New Deal? And I would like to Stefan Arens, who is interested in that topic and can tell us what the perspectives are, whether they are positive or maybe biodiesel, treated by some as renewable energy of the older generation. Well, maybe it doesn't have a future. What do you think? Dziękuję. Thank you for that question. I could talk about it for 45 minutes, so I will try to be brief. When it comes to Germany, I would say that our rapeseed cultivation wouldn't look like the way they look had it not been for diesel fuel. So it's always about what happens to the rapeseed that's cultivated. Definitely, the creation of new species has been powered by biodiesel. There are many directives, EU directives related to that, and right now using the biofuels on a normal market, you need to have a certificate. That means that the rapeseed oil needs to be 60–65% better from renewable sources of energy. Of course, there's a lot of benefits of using biofuels. In Germany, we save about 10 million tons of CO2. Today, in Bundestag, we are discussing about a new act of law and about how in the next decade the biopolicy will look like. I am pretty optimistic, and I am more optimistic than 2 years ago when this discussion started, because the political representatives have understood that apart from biofuels, from corn, for example, or grains, we don't have that many alternatives. We have electric mobility, and it will definitely grow, but biofuels in the future they will still play an important role. So I think I am optimistic in this respect, or at least in the next 2030, in the years up to 2030. It's also important for the society to learn that processing rapeseed creating biofuels with it. It also has some byproducts, like, for example, byproducts used for different purposes. So this is my forecast for the future, and I think that use of biofuels in the future, biodiesel in the future, I think that it will be beneficial for in the future, and I am kind of optimistic. Thank you, thank you. Well, it seems that the optimism is growing by the minute. I remember that we were talked in the past about competitors like palm oil, and they used even kitchen oil. Do you think that these threats can somehow disrupt our optimism? Do you think that the trade policy of the European Union is it watertight enough so as to prevent competitors to come in, like palm oil or oils from third countries? So Stefan and then Claude. This is an important point, especially in the current debate in Germany right now. We're dealing with the palm oil and biofuels, etc., etc. And I think my friends all know that in the last year, even in Brussels, that was a topic hotly debated. It's not about discrediting certified palm oil, but to curb the cutting of trees. So I think that the palm oil industry itself, has missed something. I think in their, and I think it doesn't regulate it itself. So that had a consequence that the European Commission has a very negative, now has a negative view not on the whole oil sector, not only palm oil but also on the rapeseed oil. And it doesn't have to be this way if we could have limited palm oil production in the past. I think that in the different countries in the EU and France and also in the Germany in the future, I think it will not be possible to use palm oil for climate purposes. Maybe something will change, but we have an open European market, so but I think that we will see still some import from Southeast Asia, and I don't know, maybe palm oil plants will still be used for fodder. Some byproducts can be of palms can be used for fodder. I don't know, maybe that will be happening. But it's better to replace it with local plants instead of having imports, and so as to be in balance, so as to have a better balance. But I think generally the economy is looking at oil from plant oil. So the economy is looking at prices. So we need to think about that as well, and we need to be very careful, or at least the European Union had to watch out. Should watch out, to not violate WTO regulations, so the international trade regulations. Thank you very much, Stefan, especially for a brief summary of the most important points. Claude? I did have a chance some time ago to kind of see and admire the biodiesel production and what was happening with biodiesel. But do you think that France sees some threats to this energy side of the use of rapeseed oil? Or do you think that, Claude, you share Stefan's opinion that up till 2030 we do not have anything to be afraid of? What do you think? Thank you. The debate about the use of rapeseed oil is important, both in Brussels and in Paris. In Paris, the French government or the French Parliament, has accepted a radical direction, much more radical than the one that we can see in Germany. In France, it has been banned to use palm oil in renewable energy. It's also limited to use soy for this purpose. It has increased by 0. I believe 3%. When it comes to the influence on the environment, when it comes to the idea of deforestation, in France we have decided to limit this production and limit its use in biofuels. When it comes to kitchen oil, of course, we can use rapeseed. What's strange to me is the fact that in the entire Europe, rapeseed is used successfully, and I would say that I think that the other types of oils that other people use, are they real oils? Are they safe? So I think we are very competitive when it comes to rapeseed in Europe. So I think in Europe when it comes to oil production, we are about over 30%. So if we want to kind of increase our protein production, maybe if we want to curb the imports of soy, we need rapeseed oil, right? But we also have olive oil. We have, for example, sunflowers that we produce in France. So we need also we need markets that will actually produce some fodder to fill in the gaps when it comes to the fodder. So we are actually, when it comes to rapeseed produced for fodder for animals, I think we are complementary to other plants, and that's very good. And a report they read last year, it said that biofuels are a sector which it's best when it comes to limiting and curbing CO2 emissions in transport. 36, I think, million of CO2, and right up till 2030, we will not have any better solutions to reach a better effect. So in France right now, I would say we have an approach that we are using 100% biofuels. So I think about 2,000 trucks is actually using biofuels to transport agricultural products. So thanks to that, we managed to decrease the amount of CO2 and limit the amount of the use of fossil fuels because of the use of biodiesel. A good example. We are very admiring very much the French cooperatives and how they are organized and how they can connect different interests in a nice chain. Zdenek Linhardt in Czech Republic. We know that a lot of rapeseed is devoted for biofuels. Is this approach changing in Czech Republic, or is the usage in good direction going? Do you see any threats related to that? Maybe because if this market keeps up, I think the perspectives for the future years should be good. What do you think?
The situation is quite complex. If I start with threats, we are running experiments with biofuels, with mixing different components, even of animal fats. And we are also looking what oil companies are doing. And we see that, for example, synthetic diesel is a really brilliant fuel, which we cannot call biofuel at all. And it's used to improve quality of oil, of all diesels. And this is performed or done or produced from palm oil. Therefore, even if French government decided to ban imports of palm oil, I am sure they have consumed palm oil as a synthetic diesel, because you cannot detect it in a standard fossil diesel by gas chromatograph. Situation around biodiesel in Czech Republic is respecting all rules which are set by European Union. It means we are using blend fuel, and those who are mixing biodiesel into standard diesel, they have to pay concise duty from that biodiesel. That means that if you compare photovoltaic, which is receiving enormous amount of subsidies, with biodiesel, which is taxed, then we may say that policy is not completely just to new renewable sources.
Thank you very much, Zdenek. I would like to now go back to Poland and to Director Smoczyński. Maybe my question will go forward too much, but in our national strategies and our national plans, are we somehow maybe will we focus on the rapeseed as a source of energy and a solution for CO2 sequestration? Thank you very much. I think that today it's hard to see what the final shape of this document will be. In reality, we have a proposition of activity. We have gathered very many interesting remarks and opinions, and we are analyzing them. Basically, each of these eco schemes or agricultural programs, etc., is supposed to answer the challenges of the Green New Deal, of the biodiversity strategy, or for farm to fork strategy. But today it's hard to give an answer that would clearly point to certain activities that will help us go into a particular direction. Thank you. I would like to do a final round. The debate is very interesting, but it needs to finish at some point. So, ladies and gentlemen, how do you evaluate the image of rapeseed and rapeseed oil in your societies? And what are the let's do it as well. And what are the perspectives, price perspectives for future months? So image and the need for communication, because there are many arguments that we have already touched upon in this debate, which would be interesting for the consumers of oil, but they probably don't even listen to us, because we are listened to by farmers and agro sector, but it would be nice if, unfortunately, in supermarkets they will not play our show, but a lot of arguments, we would need to have a lot of arguments. Maybe Mariusz Olejnik can talk about something, and then we will go through Europe, and then we will go back to Juliusz Modecki. Mariusz. Thank you very much. Stefan has paid attention to this twice, so we need to improve the communication with the consumers. Maybe we can invite consumer representatives next year, so that on our conferences we would focus more on consumers, and we need to tell people what are the consequences of Green New Deal for consumers. I would also like to talk about whether rapeseed is a chance. Yes, but a warm request to also protein plants associations. Let's incorporate also protein plants into this Green New Deal, because rapeseed has an appropriate, has some amount of acreage, but creating a independent protein market in Europe is important. And the French probably remember the year 74 and the soybean meal embargo. If the soybean meal embargo or bruised grain embargo will start, or if you have some Chinese market problems or problems on the palm oil market, that may cause problems. So it's also nice to deal with with those things. Also, yeah. And Fabaceed plants also, we need to deal with these. So these prices, these good prices, are they with us to stay, or is it something short term? I heard 570, but 530 I see on for August. So I think the prices will drop, but the cost of production measures, plant protection measures have increased as already. But I think we will have good progress. But I don't know what's gonna happen to the first season with the derogation for neonicotinoids. I don't know what will happen then. So Zdenek, what about you? What about your situation? How do the consumers see rapeseed, and what are the perspectives when it comes to prices?
Consumers love rapeseed oil. This is a bestseller in Czech Republic and also in Germany. And it is, or our union is promoting oilseed rape oil. So communication with consumers is excellent. The other problem is when consumer become voter, then it can play completely different role. And maybe it's up to us to decide whether we will talk more to consumer or more to voter. And if we focus more on consumer, then I think we will get a better understanding. I will show you example of one picture if you see it well. This is picture showing how mice are collapsing our crop. The red line shows calamity, and the black line shows damage. And the seasonal cycle shows how both levels are fluctuating during the year. And we have a big discussion about poisons which are applied to keep a number of mice in low levels. And this discussion needs to have a support. I think we need to discuss more scientific evidence with the consumers, and they will behave much better as voters.
What about the price perspectives for rapeseed for the future season and the next years? How would you evaluate it?
Price perspective, I think I'm more optimistic than Mariusz Olejnik. I think that prices will keep high, even if slight decrease can come, just because of inflation.
Thank you very much. Now we will move to Claude Saudet and to France. What is the image of rapeseed oil among consumers, and what are the perspectives? But very briefly, we need to finish in 7 minutes. Powiem bardzo szybko. I will say very briefly. I think that the image of rapeseed is rather good because it gives you omega-3, omega-6 acids. And I would say that the consumers are aware of what benefits it has. And I think when it comes to professionals, where there were many campaigns that were supposed to explain what this oil is, how important it is for consumers, and there are different programs that are supposed to promote this oil among consumers. And also in Poland there are such programs. We do this together as part of a European-wide program. So in France, the farmers are thinking about what will happen after the crops. So how do you evaluate the prices and for the future? Well, in France, the prices are pretty good when it comes to rapeseed. I would say that even there was slight drop, but we know that it's not only us who create prices, it also depends on other markets, so that's positive. But my entire day we were talking about something important that showed that the cost of production of different other plants will grow, and if we don't apply the same rules, then we will have problems. The production costs are growing, and this will also influence the cost of cultivation. And right now the situation is positive, but we need to think about good production in a sustainable way and until the harvest. Thank you very much, Claude. Now we will move on to Berlin. Stefan Arends. Stefan, how does German society perceive rapeseed oil? What are the price perspectives for the future? Right now the rapeseed is blooming in many areas of Germany, and we have different festivals, folk festivals, which are popular in tourist sector. So the image of rapeseed is pretty good. Of course, the oils are perceived well because of campaigns that has been organized in the recent years. The consumers are evaluating positively rapeseed oil in biofuels, and they want sustainable development, and this is something we can deliver. In the future, we think that it's important to use proteins from rapeseed also in feeding people, and I think that this will influence the rapeseed prices, which I think will be very positive in the future. They will grow, but like I said, this will depend on many aspects, from China, from the cultivation of soy in both Americas, so it's hard to think what it will look like in the next few years. Currently, I think that this is a pretty optimistic future. Thank you, Stefan, for the estimates. And last but not least, Pedro Gallardo. I left Pedro for the end because he's the boss of the working group of the oilseed plants and protein plants. So the image is apparently not good in Spain because of that incident in the past. But Pedro, what is the image? Maybe you can tell us something about rapeseed oil and the development of prices. Maybe you can tell us something about the prices of maybe sunflower oil, not rapeseed, because that's also interesting. Indeed, when it comes to rapeseed, it's an alternative, and I think that this is an approach not only in Spain but in entire Europe that we are benefiting from. We are using rapeseed for in the kitchen, right? Maybe a little bit less in Spain. So it's important to focus on the European production because palm oil is an alternative and it is competitive for what we do in Europe. So I think that rapeseed seems a very important tool for this competition. I don't think that we have record prices. It's not that all farmers now will be millionaires. Currently, I would say that we are below the prices that we should have. What we need right now is stability of prices, sustainable development of prices. On farmers, the situation is very bad when the price fluctuates. Price fluctuation is negative effect. So we want to have a balanced development so that we can prepare for it, for the cultivation. Prezes Juliusz Modecki as today's host of today's meeting. Okay, so briefly, could you also answer that question and could you tell us about what the opinions are of us consumers and what the perspectives will be? What the price perspectives will be according in your opinion? I think that the opinions about rapeseed are better and better. So this is an effect of our work. I told you before that these are two markets. So if we go back to the debates from 15 years ago about the role of biofuels, today nobody's thinking when you standing in a fuel station, there's B6, everybody's using it. We don't even think about the fact that it actually has biodiesel. But also on the food market, rapeseed oil is actually defending itself because it's a good product. But my Polish friends mentioned the benefits. But in Poland we have something like oil plant production, oil plants support fund, and this is like some money that every rapeseed producer gives some money to that fund, and these funds can be used for promotion of rapeseed oil and its products, and this is how we do it. And judging by the stabilization of the consumption of that oil, it's actually good. We are fighting competition because we are not alone on the market, right? So we are doing everything for the stability to be there. What about prices? Prices is unfortunately not possible to foresee it. It's hard to say if they will go down or go up. We always say let's secure some price and in the scale of the production that we have, sell it in the entire season, in the entire year, so that we can obtain an average price, and I think this is the safest way, and we're happy with the prices. We have the historically high prices, and this will positively influence the decision of regarding the sowing that we will do in August. Thank you. So, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, our debate has finished. Just to summarize, I will say that have we answered the question? Will it be still good? When it comes to Green New Deal, will the cultivation of rapeseed will still be something good in the face of the Green New Deal? How much do we will need to adjust our technology of cultivation and adjusting the resistant varieties? We need to realize that these limitations are also connected to costs. Nothing comes for free, so the cost will probably go up. Society needs to know that we cannot put food security at risk, especially in Europe. a country that has a continent that has a potential, and we need to make sure that in this communication with the society that we need to show the positive aspects that many of which have actually been emphasized today in our debate. And I also would like to thank all the participants of today's debate. Thank you, Stefan Arends. Thank you, Pedro Gallardo. Thank you, Zdenek Linhart. Thank you, Claude Sude, and thank you, Mr. Krzysztof Smaczyński. Thank you, Mr. Mariusz Olejnik. I would like to thank all you, gentlemen. I would like to thank you and thank Juliusz Młodecki in studio, the president of the National Association of Manufacturers of Rapeseed and Protein Plants. And I would like, Mr. President, to sum up this entire today's Eurorzepak event, the European International Day of Rapeseed in Minkowo. Ladies and gentlemen, I am happy that this initiative that we started last year has been so successful, that you participated, that you were willing to participate, that you wanted to take part. I am happy that you agreed to take part in this debate. This debate, I think, was very interesting. We touched upon many aspects. Karol also has made a short summary of our today's debate. And this is what it looks like. I think we will be able to use it in our work, in our working group, Copa Cogeca. I would also like to inform you that we can see you. Like we started the debate in like a small group. We had 600 people in Poland registered in our debate. Many people in your countries also joined in. So I'm happy that you made the signal available into your colleagues in your country. It also went to the Secretariat of Copa Cogeca, Dominique Jancourt. I would like to send my regards, who also added her work to this and her effort. And I would like to thank you, and hopefully we can meet at the next edition of Eurorzepak in maybe normal conditions. So then I would like to welcome you to Poland so that you can see some aspects of agriculture in our area. And I would also like to thank our team of translators. Thank you for being with us throughout this time, and that you were with us in this conference, and they were very efficient, and they managed to work with us. Thank you for your effort. The work you do is not easy, but it also shows how the work looks like in this European Union, in the Tower of Babel, where many people need to communicate. Thanks to the technical team, because you see only the stage, but in front of the stage we also see the entire technical team that's been working on you having a good transmission. And I would like to inform that the new debates planned for today will also take part on the same link, and this transmission will be continued. I hope you are happy and satisfied with the time you spent with us. And many of you probably were observing us on cell phones, computers, maybe on the radio, on digital radio. Let's hope. Let's meet together physically. We are missing you here in this main room. Once again, thank you very much kindly for your attention, and see you soon.